Welcome to the Unmuted Podcast. My name is Jeff. I'm the host of the podcast, Unmuted. And so where we talk about all things HR, talent, HR tech, AI, world of work. And so all of our guests are from all different parts of the world. There are TA experts, there's HR leaders, and also people who specialize in technology as well. So all of our episodes live on our brand new website, ScaleHR.com, and on YouTube as well. You can hit the bell too so that you get notified when there's new episodes drop. So there it is. So this is a really cool topic, and I'm going to explain why in a minute. But it's called From Roster to Org Chart, Lessons Leaders Can Learn from Pro Sports. And so for those of you who know me, know that I love sports. Give big props to my teams. Here we go. Ready? Vancouver Canucks in hockey, they're suck right now, which is fine. In baseball, Toronto Blue Jays. In football, Seattle Seahawks. And in basketball, of course, my beloved Toronto Raptors. So there it is. Those are my sports teams. We'll get into it with our guest soon. But I just wanted to talk a bit about this topic first and just sort of highlight two things. And so the first thing, which is really interesting about pro sports, is that talent is not always static in pro sport. And so, talent is not always locked into a role and then sort of forgotten. Athletes always are constantly assessed, coached, developed, and they are redeployed based on their performance, readiness. A lot of the pro teams have the secondary teams, which they call farm teams or minor league squads and stuff. So there's a lot of talent that comes their way. And if you compare a pro sports team to a regular organization where job titles, org charts, legacy roles often define opportunity, even when our performance or potential may tell a very different story. So that's the first point about staticness and talent in pro sport. The second point is what's interesting is that pro sport teams don't see this approach of constantly sort of evaluating talent and moving talent around. They see not doing it as a real risk. So just imagine if you're a pro basketball team and you've got certain talent that may be going through a bit of a slump, and you may want to change things around, maybe change your starting lineup or bring other players in and what have you. And if you don't, you're not really doing anything to actually fix the problem. So today we're going to explore business leaders can learn from this mindset and how actually applying a sports style lens can change how companies think about visibility, development, and talent choices. So there's a lot to talk about here, and I want to welcome our guest, Maria Vilshanski, who we finally have her on the Unmuted podcast, and so I want to welcome you to the podcast. Thanks for being here.
Thanks, Jeff, for having me. I'm really excited about it. Anytime I can talk about pro sports and organizations, I'm game.
So first question for you: do you have your own teams? Do you follow teams?
I do follow teams. I do have to agree with you on the Seahawks. That's definitely top for me. And then I think for obviously baseball is the Blue Jays.
Okay.
And then I can't comment about any other sport. Hockey's not in my wheelhouse.
I'm really thankful that you are not a fan of the Toronto Maple Leafs.
No.
Even though we both live in Toronto, right?
No, none whatsoever.
Good. For all you Toronto Maple Leafs fans out there. What's that?
I can pick a different team if you want to rile up the Toronto crowd.
No. This is my opportunity to just poke fun at the Leafs, because the Leafs, for all of you who don't know this, have not won the Stanley Cup since 1967. Yeah, it's a long time.
Same as our performance.
Anyway, carry on. So let's get to the topic at hand here. So before we dive into our topic, I can give our audience a bit of an overview of your work, what you do, your background.
Sure. So I always like to say that I like to challenge how organizations, attract, manage, hire, develop talent, right? Like I spent an extensive amount of years in headhunting, internal talent acquisition across engineering, construction, and manufacturing. Then I'd made a giant pivot to become a product manager for construction products, so software products. And I think I just kept seeing the same challenges, in construction companies, in engineering companies. You can also take it to any other industry out there. And I decided that, I love sports. I love how they operate. I kind of obviously watched Moneyball several times and just started thinking, why are we doing it this way? Right? Like, why not? Like the pro sports model makes so much sense. And I think a lot of people in HR, whether it's, in talent acquisition, not a lot, but a good amount try to apply some of those concepts. But I just think we haven't kind of said, okay, we're going to try to do it completely like a pro sports model and try to run our organization that way.
Yeah, I think there's a reason for that. But we're going to dive into these challenges. But do you want to talk a bit about your company?
Sure. So Silo In, we focus on internal talent visibility, and essentially it's just for construction. We're focused strictly in construction. And what we do is we look at talent from three perspectives. So we have the coach. The coach is responsible to understanding your internal talent pool, what skills they have, what skills they don't have, offering development opportunities, as well as mapping your company's DNA. So who are your top performers? Where do they come from? What are they doing? And then taking that DNA and actually applying it to your applicant tracking system as a layer, where that applicant tracking system pull candidates that match your company, your talent, and your needs versus, a job description. And the third piece that we do, because it's very critical in construction, is we're keeping track of the market, right? So that is our sports agent. So we have the coach, the scout, and the sports agent. And what the sports agent does, it keeps track of what's happening in the market, what projects are going on, what's coming to an end. What about your competitors who could potentially be making moves? And that's what we're offering for the space.
Oh, cool. Definitely. Okay, so let's dive into our topic here. So I have a couple of questions here for you. So the first question is, from your point of view, what is the biggest difference between how pro sport teams manage talent and then how most, other companies do?
For sure. I think it comes down to depth and context. I think that's the main thing, right? Like sports teams understand their talent. They understand their talent not only on their teams, but they understand their talent that, their opponent teams have. And the context is that with the context piece is essentially we're looking at plays in real time, right? Like we know we know potentially how they're going to perform, but then we can also evaluate the performance of the play in real time. And then if they're struggling or if they need, we need to switch them up or they're not performing, we know instantly who to bring in, right? It's not a process where we have to, put a job posting up, figuring out what happened, what went wrong, who do we need to hire, and so forth. So there's that depth and context that is very or proactive. And I find in organizations, it's very reactive when it comes to that.
I have a follow-up question on that because I think when you come to pro sports, obviously there is a huge monetary part to it. And I think when it comes to talent, talent is very scarce, right? So when you're looking at, say, basketball, right, obviously, you got your top players that are completely unmatched, anywhere around the world. And so I'm not sure you can apply that same kind of thinking to a regular, company that has a bunch of people, look, all very, talented people, but when you're looking at it through the lens of being scarce or not, do you think that has a big role in that as well?
I think there is, but I think there's always at least that one person in the company that your competitors will pay whatever they want to get them. Right. So
Okay.
while it may not apply to that, there is always the one or two people that have that particular opportunity. And usually what you do is you track everybody on that level across your competitors.
So you talked a bit about this already when it comes to actual assessing performance, right? And so obviously when it comes to sport, it's being assessed constantly. Like every player, every athlete is being looked at, so evaluated top to bottom, left to right, constantly. So what would it look like for just any regular organization to move away from static annual talent type assessment towards something that's but more dynamic?
For sure. So I think, reviews are great, like performance reviews, okay, if you do them annually, if you do them quarterly, but I always find that they're an afterthought. Like, okay, how did the work do? What did you accomplish and so forth, right? So I think we have an opportunity, it may require a bit more work on, the leadership side, but look for performance signals, right? Like as a leader, if your team is running a project or they're working on something, you have lots of opportunities to take a glance in, right? Like how are they maybe doing the work? Who are they potentially reaching out to ask a specific question, right? Are they taking longer on something? Or maybe it's the question that they're asking or the questions they're not asking, right? So I think it's being more present with the current projects as they're ongoing and trying to see those signals versus, kind of doing a postpartum where you had time to think it through and maybe not show real capabilities or real efforts.
Yeah, one of the things about this annual cycle thing, but I'm sorry, but business change quickly and may change often. If you wait 1 year to give feedback or actually do like any kind of assessment, like that ship sailed back
Mm,
and forth 8,000 times already, right?
yeah,
If you did that in pro sport, my God, you'd be like the worst team in the league because then you wouldn't be actually doing anything. Like it would
yeah.
just be status quo and staticness. And so I think, yeah, I mean, obviously, I don't think you can take the exact same approach and analyze every move and every second of everything in a regular organization because I don't think there's enough that sort of goes on to do that. But it's a bit of a mindset thing,
Mm.
I think.
For sure. I think also some of my application comes from the construction space as well, right? So in
Yeah.
construction, there's so many things that happen on a daily basis that you can actually, if you're walking around the site, you can see it, you can visualize it. But I think on a bigger picture, like I think one of the challenges that I've always seen in organizations is, okay, well, tell me, what went wrong, right? Or tell me what was right. I would love if somebody asked me one time, well, what skill could you have used that you didn't apply in here because it's not something that is a common way of how we do things, just as an example. Right. Because I think there's a little bit of that that's also needed to, inspire employees to act in the moment. Right. The same way that kind of in pro sports, like, just because I'm playing first base doesn't mean that if something happened, I wouldn't run across the third, just as an example. Maybe that's
Right.
bad baseball, but just saying.
In trying to understand who's ready now and then who their future talent might be, right? So we see that every day about sports assessment and so on. So how can companies improve talent visibility, right? So without creating pressure or burnout, which I mean, those two things are obviously a big, part of our organization nowadays. Yeah.
So when you say pressure or burnout, are we talking about leadership or are we talking about the employees or both?
Probably talent, because obviously what you're trying to do here is you are trying to build up your bench,
Yeah.
right? And so when you're trying to develop your talent, it's the same thing in organizations as it is in pro sports. Pro
Mm,
sports is obviously very public, but how do you improve your future talent, readiness and getting them ready for the next role and
mm,
not, creating too much pressure on them to perform and burn them out.
for sure. So and I kind of touched about it, but there's there's context, right? So when pro sports teams look at players, they know their past history, right? Like they know what they did good in the past season or what they didn't do. If they're scouting, they understand their potential levels. I think we as organizations actually start in a similar way, right? Like we hire somebody that has all this experience and then they start with us and then maybe a manager switches or maybe they get pulled into something else, but like we instantly lose that context of what they can do, what they've done in the past, where do they thrive. And I think the biggest thing for talent is that they spend their first 3 months trying to prove themselves and adapt themselves so much to how the company needs to be because they're trying to pass that probationary period, that a lot of those skills that they were hired for or a lot of those things that they could potentially do gets lost, right? And then eventually it comes down to, okay, well, this is how we do it. You have to fit into this, right? So I think there has to be an opportunity. And I say, like, I love this question and I wish, I asked this of more people when I used to be a leader. Is like, what skill did you have in the past that you're not using? Or like, what do you want to work on that we're not letting you work on, right? Because I think what it does, it allows you to create this path of, first of all, better conversations, but it allows them to develop without worrying that they're not fitting your mold.
I keep going back to the differences because ultimately you're going to start looking at being scarce, right? And so, for example, say you bring in a new player and you spent millions of dollars to bring them in, and they don't work out or not working out. Your first instinct is not to cut them, right? Because you've invested so much money. It's probably a little bit different in a regular organization because we're not paying people like $80 million a year to put a leather ball in a hole, but
I went.
so like, hey, I mean, if I had that kind of talent, I'd be doing that too. So yeah, very interesting. Okay, so for all of our leaders who are going to watch this episode, what is one or two practical ways that they can start managing talent more or like a pro sport team without overhauling the organization because that's not really feasible. So are there like one or two things that come to mind?
Honestly, the first one, pull out their old resume. Like if you didn't hire this person or if they're not a recent hire, pull out their old stuff, have a conversation about, things that they've done or haven't done, right? And yeah, like that's, really the first thing to have a conversation. Maybe you have that conversation as a team. Instead of like show and tell, like come and tell me about your career, right? Because what it also allows that cross development across players, right? They say that the best, pep talks happen in the locker room. So I think that's one way to do it. And the other one is try it and not micromanaging, because I think micromanaging is not the right way, but like check in more into how people are working, not what they're doing, but how they're doing it, right? Like where they get stuck. Like, did they get stuck doing research because they hate it? Right. And somebody else does it in seconds. I think it's finding those little tiny details in the day that, inspire your employees versus not potentially. And that's kind of what I think would be the easiest way to gain context and understand visibility into who you have.
So what I'm hearing from that is you really understand your staff and their strengths and so interest, and let them kind of lean in towards that, versus putting them in a little box and expecting everybody to do the same thing. One thing that's really interesting, just putting on my HR hat again, is in my career is when I'm working with managers and how they can actually manage their staff, both in the job, but also future opportunities, is obviously those conversations need to happen like on a regular basis, is that it's really important for managers to really understand, so what are their career aspirations, right? Because ultimately the idea is that managers are actually working with them to improve their performance on the job currently, but also looking ahead, right? And so how can we bridge that gap so that maybe in 6 months from now, a year from now, they can be ready to sort of take that next step? But that needs to be part of that ongoing conversation versus it just being almost like an afterthought. Like in pro sport, they're constantly analyzing performance like every day. So they're having meetings with the players and do whatever they are doing, watching film or looking at analytics and all that kind of stuff and having regular conversations. Yeah, they're just small little subtle things that managers,
Yeah. No, for sure. And I think, it's nobody's ever asked me like, what do you hate about your job? Like, like I guess, I probably wouldn't be comfortable answering that potentially, but like, there's certain things that like if we just had more honest conversations, like with individuals in our organization, I think that will allow us. And if there's a genuine interest in learning how you do your work, what are you doing, right? Like that sort of encouragement, the same way that, a franchise encourages and develops their players because they're going to make money indirectly, the company's going to make money as well, right? So I think there's something to be said about that as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, so last question that I asked, so everybody this question. If there's one thing that our viewers watching this episode can actually take away from basically everything that we've talked about, what is that one thing?
I would say context. Have context to where your talent came from. Have context to how they do the work, why they do their work in a certain way, right? So that's the one thing I would say you should take away from it to start building the foundation of understanding your talent.
Those are wise words. Thank you very much for that. So, Maria, thank you very much for being here. Really appreciate it. It was good chatting with you. And, all my viewers, this is the Unmuted Podcast. My name is Jeff. I'm the host. I'm also the founder of ScaleHR and SocialHRCamp. And so we publish new episodes every Thursday, and they live on the website at GoScaleHR.com. Want to hear from you. Want to hear your thoughts about them as well. So don't be afraid to chime in the comments. And so Maria, thank you very much.
Thank you for having me.